In the third of our videos about the building a Z80 computer system, we're going to actually make one from scratch. Here is a Vero strip board which we're going to use, and we're going to build the whole of it on here. This is the circuit. Now this circuit is a bit more than the minimum you need if you're going to build a sort of development computer. I'm planning on using this in part of another project, therefore I'm adding some extra bits like there's an A to D converter and a D to A. You obviously won't need these if you're building a simple development computer any more than, you know, I'm using, where is it, the RAM here, I'm using 8K RAM. You only need 2K really if you're going to do most experiments. I need a bit more memory this time, therefore I'm making this an 8K. Now, interestingly enough, you notice that some of the things have been marked in yellow. There's not many wires on it, and this is the net list that goes with it. And the net list has all the major core wiring in it. We have all the address buses because it goes from step to step to step, and there's a lot of them. And the data buses are even more complex. As you can see, there's a lot of things connected up to the data buses. The other ones are main processor lines plus a couple of others. In-out request, memory request, reset, read write. And then we have the RAM select, ROM select, and the decoding with the decoder there and there. The display is a worthy point to mention. The fact that I think it's always worth putting a socket in for a display. If you choose to take that display out and use it for something else, that's fine. But putting the display in does make it much easier for fault finding and checking that it actually works properly. So as I said before, these are all the sockets we're going to use. They're the ones I've chosen. I didn't happen to have one of the right size, so I cut that one down. That's why that looks a little bit unusual compared to the others. Always use sockets. It's not worth trying to do it without sockets. If there's a problem and the thing doesn't work or it goes wrong at some point, it's the devil's own job to try and remove all the wiring from the back just to take an IC out. So the socket pays for itself 100-fold. Point in sockets is when you're actually going to use one for the ROM, I would use two sockets, piggyback one on top of the other. The reason for that being because if you actually can see it on this large development system I made a long time ago, you notice there's a double socket on here, and that's so that we can take it out like that and put it back in again. Don't push it all the way in, it goes in, and that will work like that. And it just means it stays wearing out the socket. So I would always put a double socket in for the ROM. Anyway, so that's those. This is the wiring we'll be using. There's in fact 3 colours here. I usually only use one colour. There's the wiring pen. Inherited this a long time ago. And these are used for wiring all the circuit. Rarely sometimes used for put in for power wiring. I might do it for the purposes of this demonstration. But aside from that, it doesn't really matter that much. These are the wiring combs. These little funny things are available in blacks and greys and whites. These happen to be white ones. And these go along and they make, I'll show you the back of this one. You can see they make channels where you run the wire between. So you go in and wire each one. So the address bus you'll take between one and the next and the next and the next until you connect them all together as per the net list. So that's an 8088 board. Didn't make it. It was made a long time ago. And so that's that. That's what the wiring is. Now this is a Vero cutter. In case you don't have one, some people use a drill to cut the tracks in the Vero board. I find the cutter is so much easier to do than trying to use a drill bit. What else now? Well, when we start. It's an idea to decide which bits you're going to do first, and I always like to do the power rails first. So if we're doing it across here, if you look at the one we've already done here, the one I did earlier as I say, I didn't do it. We'll use probably the end ones as the power rails, so it'll be plus and minus, plus and minus. Now as everybody should know, you have to decouple these things. Decoupling is where you obviously you deal with the power rail and stop spikes and interference, etc. We use 0.1 microfarad capacitors or 0.01. Some people use just little capacitors, disc ceramics there. I personally use these things sometimes. These are just ordinary surface mount, a bit difficult to do, but they're very easy to put across between the the tracks there. So I like to use those. And they're quite inexpensive as well to buy as well. So that's that bit. So we've mentioned the display. Two things we haven't mentioned is one's the oscillator, it's not even on there, and the other one's the reset. The reset is this little bit of circuit here. Those will be done and there'll be a thing to do early on. When we come to test it, what I generally like to do myself is I tend to put in, say for example, just the Z80, the memory decoder, the ROM, no RAM, and the display, and anything that requires circuitry to make that any of those work. We'll leave out the RAM, we'll leave out all of the I/O stuff, put in obviously the reset and the crystal oscillator, and see if it works. Write a very simple little program, pop it in the ROM to write something to display, and straight away that will show whether basically the system works. If it doesn't, then at least you're not worried about something else being wired up and pulling it down. So what we'll do now is I will build this up and I'll put the wiring combs on, and we'll stop and I'll show you that. And we'll then add the power wires and so on, and we'll follow it through and hopefully see it all working at the end.